So thank you so much, Miriam, for agreeing to do this interview. This is very exciting because you and I have worked together so long, and it's nice to kind of be able to pick your brain about these issues that you and I deal with on a daily basis, and kind of have been circling our experiences. And so I think the first thing I want to just go back in time, and when was your first encounter with this idea of universal design?
Right. So I was interested in the big picture of things. So when I studied technology, I fell in love with kind of the software engineering subjects and how software engineering would affect society, etc. And I also took a course on gender and design. And so I thought, I want to write my master thesis about something related to gender, design, and the impact of technology on society. Yeah. And then I met Kirsten Ribu at Oslo Met. Yeah. And she said, have you heard about this concept called universal design? Like you could write about that, or you could write about, something more with gender related. And so that was the first time that I came across that topic. Okay. And then I read about it. And it spoke to me because it's about the society that we are building, both physically and digitally. So both tangible and intangible. And it's about what kind of world do we want? What kind of society do we want? How can we as people within technology or design shape the world to be inclusive or excluding people? Sure. Yeah. So that's why I really liked it. And so Kirsten was my mentor and my supervisor, external supervisor for my thesis. And then I started to Google what kind of companies worked within this area of universal design and ICT or technology.
What did you find?
I have found this little company called Media Elte, which was started by two blind guys. They were friends. One had RP, which is an eye disease, where he gradually lost his vision as he grew older. And the other one was a journalist, and then he was in a car crash, and he lost his eyesight. So they were both completely blind. They started this company, and they had this R&D stuff that they did. So they did a lot of research and development kind of stuff, and it was funded by the Norwegian Research Council. Uh-huh. And so I kept emailing them until they replied about writing my master's thesis and attached to one of their ongoing research projects. Mm-hmm. And they really wanted me to write about accessible games, but I really wanted to write about something related to the school system and education. So I wrote about Daisy, which is a reading software that reads to you. And Daisy was advertised as being universally designed. Okay. However, it was developed for blind students. Yeah. So I wanted to see if it really was universally designed, or if it was like a special tech thing. Yeah. So I sort of, I remember after my thesis, I was invited to do invited talks and two big conferences in Norway. One was for the Daisy community. And there I was so critical, and I told them, bam, 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 the interaction design is not good enough. It's not designed for visual students. The students and the teachers need stable software that doesn't crash. It has to be, easy to understand how to use. And so I was very critical. And then I went across the street to the other conference, which was to teachers. So it was like a Norwegian teacher conference. And there I was like, you have to use this tool. It's excellent. This is how you use it. Because there's always like things that can be better with a product. But then there's always so much potential in such products. And I'm still mad to this day about the legislation we have in Norway, where we do not demand for the suppliers of educational materials that we use in our schools, in our primary and secondary education, that they have to give up their copyright so that the people can make accessible versions of those books and spread accessible versions of those books. Instead, we have a system still today where a dyslexic student, for example, may get an audiobook delayed because it takes time to produce, but he can't share that with his fellow schoolmates.
Yeah.
Because that's prohibited in the copyright law.
That's
so I mean, we
crazy.
still, yeah. So
There's still a lot of hurdles, aren't there?
Yeah.
I'm wondering, because I want to go back, because you said that one of the things you were interested in was software engineering, but also society. And so when I hear something like that, and obviously knowing you, I know you're a very empathetic person. And so I'm wondering, what is that role in your life that empathy takes when it comes to these issues of universal design?
Yeah. That's a tough
would you have
question.
approached this career if you weren't empathetic, if you didn't have like a fundamental feeling towards other people's experiences?
I don't know. I think it's because I get really angry when people's needs aren't met, and they could have been easily. So I think it's more about political drive. It's about my reaction to something that I perceive as unjust. I have a very strong emotional reaction. I get very mad. So I want to fight for you. I want to fight for me. I want to fight for, what's right. Sometimes it's hard to know what's right, but sometimes it isn't. And sometimes it's hard to do what's right, but sometimes it isn't. And when it's easy to see what's right and it's easy to make it right, I get very mad that we don't do the right thing. I think that's why, I went in direction of maybe universal design and not climate change, for example. Because climate change is equally important, I would say. It's really important. It's about sustainability of our society over time. It's about our children, but it's not as easy to see the right path, right? But in universal design, it's so concrete. It's about, opening or closing a door for someone.
What about this issue of gender? You said you first approached kind of universal design through a sort of gender lens, looking at gender by design. Now, I don't know how you identify, but I'm wondering if you could reflect on maybe your own experience coming up in this field and some of the challenges, opportunities that you faced.
Yeah, I've never really thought much about feminism and gender until I was quite old, I think. And still, I struggle sometimes with feminism and the feminism approach sometimes, because it doesn't really I don't feel like I have had to conform to a gender role. So I identify as she, as her, as, a woman. And I like men, and so I mean I haven't really faced that many challenges. I did grow up in a very religious setting where we were told that being gay was a sin, and so I mean that's maybe my first stance on gender issues, or what do you call it, like. Yeah, I don't know what you call it.
To take a stand for someone else.
Yeah, or like just like I did not agree with that. I knew that from like in my teens. I always felt that was very problematic, and I did not want to be part of a community that treated people like that, or like that judged people based on whom they loved. So, but otherwise, I didn't really. For me, gender wasn't an issue. And I think it's because I'm not like a typical feminine or like a girly kind of girl. I mean, in some settings I am, but I'm very outspoken, and I like analysis and kind of structured things. And I'm not really, I have a hard time looking at myself as someone that's very empathic, because empathy isn't like a huge part of how I view myself. I view myself as more logical. So in that class with gender and design, it was very stereotypical, and I didn't really understand a lot of the literature that we were presented. And I didn't necessarily agree with it, but I did see how design targets some kids and not other kids, or some people and not other people, and how design helps build, these stereotypical categories that we are supposed to feel represents us.
Mm-hmm.
So that annoyed me a bit, and I felt, it wasn't very inclusive to not.
No.
So, but I mean, so if it comes to Lego, for example, I don't like the Lego for girls kind of thing. I think it's stupid. It sucks. Lego should just be Lego. Like, stop
Yes.
making it pink and blue. So that's
Stop
how I felt with this.
everything.
Right. That's how I
Yeah.
felt with design too. Like, stop telling me who I have to be to buy your product.
Right. I think this is really, really fascinating. Your life course and how it's kind of evolved over time. And I had the same sort of kind of initiation into, I guess you could say, activism or standing up for justice. In my schools and in my family life, it was always more or less that, people who are on the LGBT spectrum were kind of outcast and ostracized and stereotyped and stigmatized. And that was my first experience in high school, standing up for other people's who I thought were being treated unjustly. But I noticed whenever you mentioned education that a fire came into your eyes.
Yeah.
And I know you also have children. So I'm wondering if you could maybe just talk about that experience as a mother and as someone who has children in schools. Like, how do you deal with the fact that, the educational system is unjust?
It has so many layers. So it's hard to know where to start. I think it's underfunded. That's the main thing. And so when it's hard to demand a lot of teachers, like to demand more than we do today, when you know that their salaries are very low and they are short-staffed and they are under pressure and they don't have the finances to hire in like special eds people, or people who are, skilled with more like supporting roles to create a good school environment. So that's one side of it. So it kind of hurts to see that and know that it's hard to do something about. So I mean, I'm mostly mad that it's underfunded, because that's the like structural issue for everything. And then and the system is such that you have to have, if you have a child with a special need, you have to have a paper that says that you can demand for your child this and that, and you only get what that paper says that you can demand. You don't get what your child actually needs, if that changes over time.
Yeah.
And it's so there are many things that are broken about our educational system, but I also am inspired by it, because I think the kids today, they learn to treat each other really well. And I've met a lot of teachers that, read, I send them YouTube links and they read up on their own and then study it and try to understand our children and understand their different needs. So I would say that the main issues, I think, are structural. Yeah, I don't know if that was the answer that you.
It's absolutely amazing.
for.
I love listening to you talk about these issues, because there's always something new that kind of comes into my own perspective. And so I always realize new ideas whenever you're talking. I'm wondering, though, I would like to get back into your kind of career in universal design, because you've been at this for longer than I have. So I'm wondering if you could talk about how your perception of universal design has changed over the time that you've been working in this.
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning, it was a very easy definition. Universal design means designing something that everybody can use. So at a certain level, it has to be user friendly to all your users. That kind of approach, very concrete. And then today, I would say it's about inclusion, and it's about systems and service chains, and not really touch points. So not even a product, but the whole system in which this product lives. The purpose of it, the whole. So I changed that, and also I really like the cross discrimination or the intersectionality aspects of it. So instead of just looking at universal design as something that's there for disabled people, which I maybe did in the start, like people with reduced vision or mobility, those kind of user groups, I now look at it as something that is more structural, more systematic, and also affects all of us to a higher degree, because we all kind of move between the different user groups depending on events in our lives and whatever happens to us or people in our family. And also I would say, when I started out, we didn't really reflect much upon how we view universal design, or how we view disability, and how we view society. So I think that has matured over time, and you can see it also linked back to, for example, LGBTQ plus people in community. How we are starting now to, so we are sort of debating, people that are transsexual and the trans community. We're sort of struggling to understand maybe their needs today. So, I mean, and I feel like we already did this once before with the gay community. So we are going to look back at the discussions that we have today and sort of like, why didn't I just get it? Yeah, I don't know. I think I don't know if I answered your question, but it's a lot more nuanced. And I think, I don't know if you've seen the new video that came out, the Crip Camp,
No.
YouTube video or the YouTube movie, which it shows how the Americans with Disability Acts came to be. The fight for Section 503, I think it was, and the built environment.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting. And you can see the shift from, it was a group of people with disability, young people with disability, that just, they didn't want to be treated as second rate class citizens anymore. And so they just protested and said, no, this isn't, the problem isn't with me. The problem isn't with a person being non-typical or like not what we call A4 in Norwegian. It's about the society. It's about society not being flexible, not being adaptable, not being inclusive. So you see that shift from the medical perspective on a disability to a social view on disability, that it's not maybe the flaws of each of us that's the issue. It's the capability of the society to cater to us, regardless of our different needs.
So I want to get into that flexibility issue, because I mean, you already kind of talked about how universal design can apply to anyone, and that everyone stands to benefit from this. So I'm wondering, how do you see that in your own life? Have you seen universal design kind of making improvements in your life, or changing the way you live or work, or anything like that?
It's a hard question. I think you notice universal design when it's missing.
Okay.
That's when you notice it. You notice it if you were tired and you didn't understand the system, and you made a flaw and you can't correct it. Then you get pissed because like, it was so complex and I was tired, and you have to, And if you're walking somewhere and you're in pain and there's no place to sit, if you're pregnant and nobody gives you their seat, if you're with your family and they have a wheelchair and suddenly there's places you can't go. So I think you notice it when it's lacking. And I think if we are friends with people that have disabilities or different needs, we will see it a lot more. So it's unfortunate that the young people who might be the ones who will kind of push changes, they seldom have disabilities, unfortunately. And then when you have disability, it's like some people do have disabilities, but then they are sometimes also ill, or they are in different situations, which makes it hard to argue for like the system to change.
Yeah,
I don't know if that makes sense.
It does, because it's complicated, and especially when you bring age into it, it just becomes even more challenging to kind of find ways of pushing the agenda forward and creating advocates out of the next generation.
And I think you see a little bit the same thing when it comes to race now, and you see the Black Lives Matters movement in America, and you see that. As white and privileged people, you don't see it. You don't see the racism. And I think it's the same problem that we have with, people with disabilities, that it's so easy to forget about if it doesn't concern you. So that's actually something that I try to do a lot, try to just make people aware. That might be the most important contribution that I do in my career. Just make people aware of the need to actively be inclusive when you design services, when you build technology. And think about, what if this user is we have it like these codes in that they cannot state their address, or that their address needs to be hidden because they're in danger. Like, how do our system accommodate those? What about if they don't speak Norwegian? How do we accommodate those? So there's different aspects of it. It's not just related to whether you can see or not. It's a lot more complex. And so those kind of conversations we have now in NAV, where I work.
That's absolutely critically important. I want to just kind of wrap things up here and ask you, just as a final takeaway, what's one thing that you would want the listeners of this podcast to know? What's one thing you would want them to take action on? What would you give them as a gift?
A gift. Yeah, I felt like this podcast ended very quickly.
I know
you have to
hours.
Right. If you're working in building technology and design, you have to know the legislation. You have to understand that none of your leaders may know it, none of your colleagues may know it. You may be a new person coming into a new place, and you might be the only one who knows about the legislation, and you have to push it, you have to implement it. Or else you will not only be breaking the law, but you will deliver products that are not usable for all. But then it's so easy to just stop there and to be happy with this product that checks all the check marks. Yeah. And that is not what universal design is about. Yeah. Universal design is about creating societies that everybody can live their lives in, and be active members of. And so, you need to also push, like, how is this product that you are developing, how is that going to be used? What's the service that is going to be a part of? I think that's the really necessary awareness that you need to have if you work within technology and design. I don't know if it's a gift, but it's a minimum requirement, or else do something else and don't destroy this thing that I'm going.
Actually, I lied, because I thought about another question I want to ask you, because we were talking about your job being about awareness raising. So I'm wondering, has universal design helped you raise your own awareness about the experiences of people that would be, kind of outside your immediate scope of reference?
Yeah, it has. It has. Yeah. It has being part of, communities where people don't share your exact life experiences. It teaches you so much, both about yourself as a person, but also about the time that we live in and the society that we live in. It's truly And yeah, it's like it's a gift to be able to have friends that don't think exactly like you, that have different experiences from you. I remember the first time I'd been alone in the office at Media Elte with my blind bosses, and I had like visually impaired colleagues and stuff. And I came back after a week because I was a student, right? So I came back after a week and I was going to do some more. And they were like, "We've been looking for the sugar now for a week. Do you know where it is?"
That's amazing.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
Changes your idea of what tidiness means, for example.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's funny and it's interesting.
Yeah, and it brings so much richness to your life because then you have just an awareness of other people's experience.
Yeah, and I think it also shapes your own identity and your own value. I was on sick leave for quite a long time, a couple of years ago. And I really felt, how much work and being able to work and being well influences your identity. And so it really helped me to have friends that I know have struggled to get jobs because they can't see, or they're in a wheelchair, or they can't speak, fluently, like have a dysarthria. And like to know that I was telling them, that's not what makes you human. That's not what makes you valuable. And then I had to tell myself that, if you're sick or not, that's not what makes you valuable.
Yeah.
And so it teaches you a little bit more about the value of human. What's really who are we? Are we worthy of being included in the society? When are we not? And so that kind of perspectives are also very interesting.
So it sounds like it actually had an impact on your own self-esteem and your own ability to kind of care for yourself and during difficult times.
Yeah, I guess, on my capability to overcome my own shortcomings. And because we all have them.
Yeah.
And so like it's I guess it's a pushback from the idea that you have to be perfect to be perfect. A little bit.
Yeah. That's really, really profound. I absolutely love it. I think if there's any takeaway from this conversation, it's that, working in this field can help you with self-care. It can help you with your own self-esteem because you see yourself in a different way.
Yeah.
Because you're seeing the world in a different way.
Yeah.
Amazing. All right. Anything else that you would like to say before we close off here?
Have fun. Hang in there. Corona is going to pass. And I worry about you because this is like for the students, right?
Yeah.
I worry about our young people, and we worry about you at NOV. And so I want to just give a shout out to you. I see you.
Oh, Miriam, you're an absolute gem. Thank you so much.